Most questions I might have for our next guest, I have no idea what the answers are. And I mean that with respect. Mike Ginnitti with Spot Track joining us on the West Her Hotline. I think the timing's great here, for our purposes at least, Mike, with the free agency in the NFL on the horizon and even maybe the NHL trade deadline, although I'm not sure what we need to know about some of those details. But with football, we've got the cap going up. How do you see, just in general to start here, Mike, the Bills' situation as the offseason gets going?
About average. I mean, they're in contention. That's the window they're living in right now, so it's going to be complicated this time of year, at least starting off. They're in the negatives, heading towards the big week here. So there's work to be done. They're adding, not subtracting right now. I think that's a good sign. So it seems like things are fairly stable, and there's certainly ways to open up some cap space and be somewhat aggressive, I think, when March hits. Not uberly aggressive, but that's sort of the cost of doing business at this level.
And what are some ideas you think that they should be attacking here to try to free up room between now and what is the date for free agency opening? We're a week and a half out, I think.
Yeah, right.
Like
midweek. March 11th.
Yeah, right.
March 11th.
Midweek, week after next. Obviously, they've got big contracts. They just did something with Spencer Brown. Dawson Knox is one idea, Mike. They have to do something about that number. I don't think they'll cut this player, but I think they got to adjust that contract.
Yeah, it could get to a cut, maybe with a wink, we're going to bring you back. But certainly the contract has to move one way or another. My guess is, and this has been successful in the past, is there's some sort of pay cut discussion happening behind the scenes with a couple of players. But I think Knox is at the top of that list right now. So it's just about, obviously we want him here, but not at the price tag, and we've got to obviously fill in some room on March 11th. So I think that's prioritized right now as we speak. We'll see where that happens. But I do believe if we're getting to March 9th, March 10th, when the push comes to shove, that they might have to move off of that contract just for flexibility purposes. Outside of that, it's going to be a mixed bag. I expect a little bit of everything: extensions, trades, outright releases, pay cuts, the works, and I don't think Brandon Beane's been too shy about having those kind of off seasons in the past. It's just going to be a little bit more complicated right now.
Mike already alluded to, we got the definitive number on the salary cap for this year. Teams who had I think a working knowledge of about what the increase would be. How much does the year-over-year increase in the cap afford teams the ability to just keep kicking the can down the road? Like, I know the Saints were a team that was notorious for years when they weren't even that good anymore, that were still pushing off, and eventually you run out of runway and have to address all that. A team like the Bills that are still so squarely in a contention window, how long can they just sort of keep pushing stuff, void years and all that kind of stuff, off to the future while they're trying to have the best team they can?
Yeah, there's probably somebody much smarter than me that can actually put a number to that, budgetarily, with the year-over-year increases, which have been between really the number's about 8% is what I think we're budgeting for year to year on this salary cap increase, which just happens to be about 21 to 23 million. So it's significant. It's multiple contracts, it's multiple extensions if you're thinking about it in terms of players. So there's no question that affords GMs the ability to sort of take a deep breath and say, I don't have to think about everything right now. This is, yes, we're winning right now. We're all in right now. But from a salary cap perspective, because of the rules of this CBA, we can make this next year's problem or 4 years down the road's problem with some of these void years. So 66% of the league is doing this right now. And most of them are doing it at a really high rate. Buffalo is one of those teams. They have a dozen void year situations on their books right now. I think they'll add a few more when more of these conversions come to play here. So it's kind of the going rate of doing business, but the league and the salary cap increases are bailing out these GMs in a very positive manner.
With Mike Ginnitti of Spot Track, Mike Schopp and the Bulldog here. So we've talked about Knox here. Taylor Rapp seems like maybe kind of an easy one for this if the Bills were so inclined. Who else might stand out to you as someone where the Bills really need to figure out a new deal?
Yeah, I think Curtis Samuel probably
pretty
quickly falls off here for cap purposes. There's some conversations to be had about, if you want to get some bigger names in here, Deion Dawkins and Ed Oliver, both who have two years left. obviously important players. They're getting to that age where, that next contract might look a little complicated when you're talking about 2027 and beyond. So some decent conversations to have there about some high prices. What happens with Tyler Bass? I feel like we haven't seen him forever, obviously, with the injury. Will that be a cap replacement that they're going to seek in March and April here, or maybe even in the draft to free up some space here in March? And then, then you get back to your big contracts that you can just move some things around, like Josh's contract. And I think Taron Johnson looks pretty stable after some conversations that have been had. But I wouldn't say there's a plentiful amount of options with the current roster to just sort of maneuver, as some of these teams have, upwards of 90 to 100 million of flexibility.
A lot of attention on the interior of the Buffalo offensive line. O'Cyrus Torrence could get an extension after completing now 3 years in the league. He's got 1 year left on his second-round rookie deal. But the two guys to his left, the center McGovern and the left guard David Edwards, are both unrestricted free agents. Do you have an idea, Mike, where their markets may lie, and how realistic is it for the Bills to maybe hope to hang on to one of the two?
Yeah, one is probably right. If there's a pecking order, I think maybe you're sliding with Edwards back at the guard position. There's less of a guard demand out there right now. There's also less supply out there right now. So, we've got him upwards of $20 million just on a market valuation right now, which seems crazy, but that guard price is going to be upwards of 30 sooner rather than later, possibly even this year with some of the rookie extensions that hit. So he's, second-tier guard. He's been super, super consistent on this team. That's probably the player we're identifying right now, only because the center market has all of a sudden become kind of nice, kind of flush on this with free agency. There's been 2 or 3 really nice releases, but McGovern probably still sits near the top of that list. 16 to 17 million, that's right below the top of the hill right now at the center position. So he's looking at a pretty nice situation for himself, though the market did get a little bit deeper over the course of the last 48 hours.
Mike, so in terms of the league and who's available by position this year in free agency, do you have thoughts on where the strength is? I mean, certain of these players are household names, but not that many. And if you're the Bills and you're thinking about wide receiver, if they ever are, but if they actually were this year thinking about wide receiver, I don't know, how much is there for them to play with?
Yeah, there's a reason guys get the free agency, right? So when you're looking for big names, you're probably not going to see too many. It's a weak market. That's why you're hearing the players like Alec Pierce and Juwan Jennings and, even Tyreek Hill after being released with his injury. He's going to be one of those names that teams at least take a sniff at. Mike Evans, Romeo Doubs. There's some names, there's some red flags with every single one of those names. So that's why I think for the most part, these players have had their market value suppressed quite a bit in the open market here, because most teams just decide we're going back to the draft. We're going to use a second or third round pick and take a flyer in that regard. Positionally, though, to answer your kind of broader question, I do think it's a pretty good draft for the free agency for the defensive line, and it isn't a very strong draft in that regard. So there are edge rushers, there are inside players, there are off-ball linebackers. I think those are a couple of needs here for Buffalo, at least from a depth perspective. And there are safeties, and I know that's a big question mark with the Bills going forward as well. So I'd lean towards the defensive side of the ball, which probably isn't answering too many of your phone calls right now with wide receivers and maybe some tight ends to fill in the blanks. But that's what the draft is for. I think the draft is showing it's been much more offensive friendly at times. So I do think there's a nice split where you can do most of your defensive damage in March and then wait till April and May to kind of fill in the blanks elsewhere.
There is still the trade market when you talk about receiver too. Yeah. If the free agent market isn't deep, certainly the draft is an option. On the trade front, Mike, maybe for us and for our audience, because we know the Bills, this whole conversation is predicated on the Bills being tight against the cap, which a lot of contending teams are. If they wanted to get in the business of trading for, say, A.J. Brown, who's got a big contract already that you'd be inheriting, how can they work around that? Is there a new deal as soon as the player gets here that lowers this year's number, that makes it more palatable for the Bills in the short term? And some version of what we said at the beginning, just kicking the can down the road. Is that a way that you could see them pulling that caliber of player in with that caliber of contract, or are they just not going to be able to be in that market at all?
Well, what's interesting is because of the use of all these void years on most of these recent contracts, the traded contract, the contract you'd be acquiring with a trade is has become unbelievably friendly because for the most part, everything's being pushed down the first 1, 2, 3 years of that contract. So I think I jumped on with you guys at the deadline last year when we were discussing Waddle. Waddle as a trade right now is less than $5 million on the cap for 2026, right?
Wow,
And A.J. Brown is $7 million on the cap in 2026 because of the way this thing is structured. So it's unbelievably doable from that perspective. There's just a lot more that comes to it, right, with compensation and how much those teams effectively have to keep in dead cap, which makes things complicated on their end. But the trade is becoming more and more prevalent because of this explanation, this part of it. It's easier from a financial standpoint just to drop somebody in, and then you have to deal with everything else going forward, obviously.
Well, that's fun. That's, you can be hopeful.
Right.
But, trades are fun.
I like all that sound. I like how all that sounded. Yeah.
If you know, Mike, Kyler Murray and Tua Tagovailoa, are they different in that respect? Two players that maybe their teams want to move on from.
Contractually, I'm guessing you're asking contractually because I don't think Tua is, from a football standpoint, very tradable. I do think Kyler Murray is probably one of the bigger trade candidates on the market right now, but contractually both can be moved. It's certainly more cost-effective for Miami to trade than to release Tua this year. I do think one of those things will happen, however. Kyler's a little bit easier. It's about a 2-year, $80 million contract, which sounds crazy, but, in the going rate of starting quarterbacks, that's pretty average right now. And with Tua, it's about a 1 for $57 million, which that's pretty bonkers. But from the other team's perspective, from Arizona and Miami's perspective, that is how they're entering March right now, is with the expectation that they're going to seek trades for both those players. And I do think Kyler gets done at some point in time here.
I love that the gap from your website, the NFL team salary cap tracker, between first and 32nd in cap space is $148 million. Tennessee has $90 million in cap space, and Dallas is $58 million under. That's a pretty big gap.
Not quite as egregious as baseball yet, but we're getting there, aren't we?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Dallas is $58 million over. That's right.
Right.
So, when you said up front, like the Bills are kind of in the middle when it comes to this. Minus $8 million might look worse than that, but it does get worse than that.
Oh, yeah. Dallas just slapped that tag on George Pickens, which added $28 million to their business, and they've got plenty of work to do. But to kind of answer it this way, I don't see any team having crazy trouble this year where we've had, the Saints in the negative hundreds at times and a couple other teams pretty far down the path. So I think we're all kind of figuring this out, and to circle back, the league is certainly helping with these massive cap increases.
Yeah, and teams have found their appetite to be able to digest the big dead money ever since, I think, really, you might know better than me, Mike, but it feels like once Denver did Russell Wilson, and that was like $80 million or something. And I don't remember if they split it up with a June 1st or whatever, but they just okay, we're doing this. And it seems like that's why, in a year like this, I'm like, of course Miami's going to move on from Tua. I don't care how much the dead money is. Denver did it. They're going to do it. And teams just aren't that scared of doing it anymore. They can still do business with a big dead money number.
It's a really important point, and you're dead on here. I'd go back maybe 2 more years before Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was definitely the balloon bursting with this whole conversation, but the Rams actually won a Super Bowl with the second most dead cap in football. That first year that they acquired Stafford and they traded Goff and they released Todd Gurley and they had a whole bunch of mess on their hands, and it seemed like they were sort of just kind of giving up, and then they acquired Stafford and won the Super Bowl. That was definitely an eye-opening moment for the league that, hey, maybe there's enough to go around even on the negative side of things, that we don't have to just push it all into these positive contracts. And then obviously void years have helped the process even further that. So no question, like I said, my expectation is that Miami will take on $99 million for Tua to move on from him over 2 years. And that's kind of the going rate with a bunch of players. I think that will become much more prevalent because bigger contracts mean bigger mistakes, mean you have to kind of, wipe up the mess a little cleaner here.
I'm sorry if this is an embarrassing question to ask, but how does a void year work? Is it like a team or a player option? Like, does anybody have a leg to stand on to say, hey, I want you to honor this, or the team might want, or is it just designed to just eat cap space at the back end of deals, and there's no way the team or the player can ever use it as an actual year of a contract?
Right. They're written into the contract as actual void years, many times they will have a dummy salary. Usually it's ridiculous, like $50 million, $100 million. The Saints with Taysom Hill used to put in $130 million dummy salaries, I think, just to have some fun with it. But really it is just a salary cap moniker. It is a situation where the cap is allowed to, with bonuses, transfer over 5 years. And back in the day, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, that used to mean you'd have 5-year contracts so that you could spread it out to the maximum. Well, nobody wanted 5-year contracts anymore because things were changing so rapidly, so quickly. So now we can have 2-year contracts with 3 void years to still have the same effect from a cap perspective and get players back to free agency or into that next contract even quicker.
Who has the worst contract in the NFL? So Tua and Murray are not in, their teams are not in great positions having them for what they have them. Deshaun Watson comes to mind, or certainly would have a year or two ago. I'm not sure if that's the case. Maybe they can wiggle away from him if injuries are too much. I don't know how that exactly will work. But does anybody strike you as the easy answer to that question?
It's absolutely Watson. And I think it will be for quite some time, because it is the singular thing stopping somebody else from getting a full guaranteed contract, and I don't think we have that in our future very soon here. And it's for this reason. It's guaranteed obviously right now, so $46 million cash guaranteed. And then once they're finally done and moved on from this thing after next year, they're going to have to take on $80 million of dead cap just to have this guy, probably not play football anymore at 32 years old. So it's because they have kicked the can every single year of this guaranteed salary. So it is a situation that feels like it's coming to an end, and yet for Cleveland, there's probably 3 more seasons. It's this year, it's 2 years of dead cap, and then they can sort of take a deep breath. I don't know how this GM is lasting through this, but God bless him, I guess.
Wow. Do you think? I mean, this is not really your area of expertise. Like, there was a vibe toward the end of the season, like he was practicing, and like every week, Kevin Stefanski, their coach at the time, would have to fend off questions about whether, are you going to activate him? Is he in the plans? Like, do you think that just goes on unabated, or do you think he ever suits up for them?
I think there's a real good chance he's the week 1 starter. Not for any of the contractual reasons. I just think it's going to be a really ugly offseason for Cleveland for a lot of reasons. They're about to lose all 5 of their starting offensive linemen. That's not a good way to start things off here. So from the trenches perspective, it's going to be young. It's going to be inexperienced. Do you really want to throw Shadur Sanders into that fire? I don't know. That might be how it works out. But my guess is you're just going to throw the veteran that you're paying a ton of money to and say, go do a job for us for 1 more year, and then we're going to get things right in 2027. But I do think, from a football perspective, that it makes sense to at least have him compete if he's healthy in 2026.
A couple more, if we can here, Mike, and one is specifically a Bills player question, and that's Dalton Kincaid, who the question now is on the table is, will the Bills pay him the 5th-year option he's entitled by being, if they choose to, a first-round pick? He's been good when he's played, but he hasn't played that much. I wonder what your perspective might be on that, either from simply the standpoint of a thought on the player and the idea, or including sort of what that means for a tight end. We have interesting kind of wrinkles when it comes to slotting players by position. Linderbaum in Baltimore being a center, but the franchise tag would count him as an offensive lineman, which changes the numbers. I'm getting a little bit convoluted here with this, but what about Kincaid for you?
Yeah, I just ran the number since the cap just dropped this afternoon. You mentioned him not playing much. That actually helps Buffalo a little bit in this regard, because playing time and Pro Bowls factor into what that 5th-year option price costs. So based on our numbers here, the 5th-year option for 2027 should cost about $8.1 million for Dalton Kincaid. Right. Because of that price, to me, it's a slam dunk. You're going to keep him through 2027. You're going to guarantee it. It's basically 2 years and $15 million or not even 2 years and $12 million for a player that still I think has a really nice ceiling in this system. Obviously, there's some continuity with Joe Brady coming over here, and you'll figure out the rest going forward. But I don't think we're talking extension by any means right now. But an $8 million guarantee for a player like that, I think, is a slam dunk.
Is there a take here that's interesting on tight ends and franchise tags? That's not the situation with Kincaid, but the point about Linderbaum seems a little wrong that he would count like offensive tackles do, and I think that's what maybe priced Baltimore out on, one of the best centers in the league.
Yeah, it would have been $26 million to tag Linderbaum, so that's obviously too high for him. There's another one with linebackers. So you've got your off-ball linebacker that's around $20 million a year, and then you've got your Micah Parsons, who's $46 million a year. Those players as singular linebackers with franchise tags are under one umbrella. That's going to have to change at some point in time. But tight ends have been kind of priced right. They sit separate from wide receivers, so they've been at about, I think it's about 15.2 for Kyle Pitts on his franchise tag this year with Atlanta. So I expect that remains fairly favorable if we have to get to that situation with Dalton Kincaid in 2028. But that one seems pretty decent. There are some gaps in the cracks, though, that have to at least get discussed in the next CBA.
Do you know if you get credit for a Pro Bowl just by eventually making like Joe Flacco this year, or do you have to be like the from the original players that are chosen for the Pro Bowl?
It's original ballot. So it's playing time throughout the regular season and then original ballot Pro Bowls in your first 3 years as a rookie. Yep.
So not everybody who gets added as a fill-in gets credit for it in the same way. That's probably good.
I feel like that's not noted enough. I think people get too much credit for those just to show up when you're a fifth option.
Yeah, and if I'm named but I don't go, even if I don't really have a good reason, it still counts.
I still get the benefit of that at fifth-year option time. Right.
Yeah.
Or any bonuses.
Right.
Okay. All right. Anything, Bulldog, that we didn't cover?
I feel good.
Always great to learn all this from you, Mike. Thanks for sharing your time with us.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks.
You're welcome. Mike Ginnitti of SpotTrack, the go-to salary cap, salary information site, I think, in the industry for all sports.